I saw blood, my own blood, gushing from the wound, but I stood up. They tried to poison me with cyanide. No effect. They put a bullet in my chest. I was still breathing, feeling a burning rage. They beat me, shot me again and again, and then finally threw me into the icy Neva. But even then, at the very bottom of that black frozen water, I couldn't understand. How did I, a simple Siberian peasant who had survived dozens of assassination attempts, conspiracies, and slanders, end up here? Why does my death still send shivers down people's spines, and my name is surrounded by thousands of legends? Prepare yourselves, my friends. Today I, Grigori Rasputin, will guide you through my own life. A life full of miracles, scandals, and deadly intrigues. We will delve into an abyss of mysteries, where truth is sometimes more terrifying than any fiction. Because my story is not just a page in a textbook, it is a living legend that continues to stir minds. My name, Grigori Rasputin, still resonates sometimes as a whisper of reverence, sometimes as a curse. But one thing is certain. I remain one of the most mysterious and controversial figures in the history of the Russian Empire. My life is shrouded in countless legends, mystical rumors that persist to this day. Some elevate me as a prophet, almost a holy healer. Others brand me a dangerous manipulator, and sometimes even an agent of dark forces. How did it come to pass that I, a simple peasant from a remote Siberian village, managed to gain the almost boundless trust of the Imperial Family, becoming one of the most influential personalities of my time? Why was I constantly pursued by endless conspiracies and assassination attempts? And how did I manage to evade death for so long, as if I truly possessed some supernatural protection? Today, I will embark with you on this incredible journey through the footsteps of my life, to attempt to separate harsh historical truth from fantastical speculation. We will look into the abyss of court intrigues, resounding scandals, and deadly conspiracies, to unravel the true essence of a man whose life and death are still shrouded in a dark, unsolved mystery. Who was I truly? A wise elder, a cunning intriguer, or a prophet marked by God? I invite you to immerse yourselves in this captivating story, where reality may prove to be far more astonishing than the most unimaginable legends. I, Grigori Efimovich Rasputin, was born on January 21, 1869, in the remote Siberian village of Pokrovskoye, in the Tobolsk Governorate. It was typical Siberian backwoods, endless forests, treacherous swamps, a harsh climate, and an hourly struggle for survival. My family, the Rasputins, was a typical peasant family of Tsarist Russia, numerous, hard-working, but extremely poor. My father, Efim Yakovlevich, owned a small plot of land that could barely feed all of us. We had to toil ceaselessly, especially during the short Siberian summer, when peasants cultivated the fields almost around the clock, striving to gather the harvest before the first frosts. My father not only plowed the land but also fished in the river, and in winter, he worked as a carter, transporting goods and people by sleigh. Villagers remembered him as a strict, demanding, but fair man, respected for his reliability and perseverance. My mother, Anna Vasilievna, was a deeply devout and incredibly gentle woman. Religion and Orthodox rites held a central place in her life, and it was she who instilled in me that deep, almost fanatical religious fervor that shaped my character and my entire worldview. My childhood years were no different from the life of any peasant child of that era. From an early age, I helped my family with household chores, the house, the field, caring for livestock. All of this became part of my daily life. But even then, in this seemingly ordinary life, villagers began to notice something strange in me, something inexplicable. There are memoirs from the residents of Pokrovskoye, later meticulously documented by historians. For instance, my fellow villager Paraskova Korotkova recounted that after a severe illness I suffered in childhood, I became withdrawn, incredibly contemplative. I avoided noisy games with peers, preferring to spend time alone. I often went into the forest, could sit by the river for hours, gazing hypnotically at the water, as if listening to something unknown, invisible to the eye. Another witness, Mikhail Novoselov, later recalled that in my youth, I possessed an extraordinary ability to calm even the wildest horses and other domestic animals in a matter of minutes. But here it's important to pause. These recollections emerged after my name had already resounded throughout the empire, and rumors and legends about me had spread like wildfire. That is precisely why I approach the reliability of such testimonies with great caution. And you, my listeners, should do the same. At 18, I took a local girl, Praskovia Fyodorovna Dubrovina, as my wife. Our marriage was arranged by our parents, as was customary in all rural families of that time. Praskovia bore me 7 children, but only 3 of them, my son Dmitri and daughters Maria and Varvara, lived to adulthood. The early years of my family life flowed ordinarily, like that of any Siberian. We managed our household. I helped my father and took on any work to provide for my wife and children. But even then, villagers began to notice my increasing inclination towards spiritual pursuits. I began to frequently leave home, going to nearby monasteries or meeting elders and preachers who passed through Pokrovskoye. My religious quest gradually became more passionate and profound, shaping within me that unique outlook on life that would soon compel me to leave my native lands and embark on distant, unknown wanderings. The mid-1890s marked a true turning point for me. Yesterday's ordinary peasant, immersed in household management and raising children, suddenly felt an irresistible, all-consuming urge for wanderings and spiritual quests. These changes initially astonished the residents of Pokrovskoye, and, to be frank, seriously worried my wife Praskovia Fyodorovna. My new passion became a severe trial for her. I could embark on pilgrimages for weeks or even entire months, leaving the care of the children and the entire household on her fragile shoulders. But despite all the difficulties, Praskovia silently and patiently accepted my new path, seeing it as a trial sent from above. My first journeys were short and local. I visited Tobolsk and Verkhoturye, then the spiritual center of Siberia. It was in Verkhoturye that an episode occurred with me that was later hotly debated in my village. After long prayers and night vigils in the monastery, I began to have visions. Contemporaries recounted how, upon returning to my native village, I spoke of encounters with angels and saints, which simultaneously evoked admiration and outright mockery. But the true fame of the strange elder from Pokrovskoye began after I undertook far longer and bolder journeys to the central monasteries of Russia. One of the most significant and, as it turned out, scandalous, was the pilgrimage to Valam. On the islands of Lake Ladoga, in the abode of strict ascetics, I first encountered the ambiguous reaction of the monks to my behavior. Some of them later recalled that I could fall into a state of religious ecstasy, cry out loudly during prayer, and gave the impression of someone on the verge of madness. One witness even dared to appeal to the abbot with a request to expel the strange pilgrim from the monastery. However, other monks, on the contrary, saw in this evidence of genuine piety and deep spirituality. No less curious was my visit to Optina Pustin. Here, according to the recollections of pilgrims, I immediately found myself at the center of attention. Despite not being a monk, many travelers began to turn to me for advice and even blessings. It was here that my astonishing ability to attract people, as if by a magnet, first manifested itself. Soon, the monastic authorities also noticed this, reacting warily to the appearance of a strange layman claiming the role of a spiritual mentor. One of the Optina elders, Barsanufius, later wrote about me that, although I made a strong impression on pilgrims, my behavior was too provocative and eccentric, which in no way conformed to strict monastic rules. An episode that occurred during my visit to the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra was particularly hotly debated in society. According to pilgrims' recollections, I, overcome by religious ecstasy, suddenly fell before the icons and began to weep loudly and prophesy about impending calamities. Such behavior caused considerable confusion and even a minor scandal, forcing the Lavra monks to ask me to leave the monastery. Such episodes rapidly became public knowledge, and already then began to shape my controversial image, enhancing both my fame among the faithful and my highly ambiguous reputation among the clergy. Alongside genuinely confirmed events, there were also legends that later became an integral part of my mystical image. For instance, rumors persistently circulated about my visit to the holy mountain of Athos. It was said that I had supposedly engaged in conflicts with the Athonite monks due to my overly liberal interpretation of the Orthodox faith, and was even expelled by them for inappropriate behavior. although historians have never found reliable documentary evidence for this fact. My wife, Praskovia Fyodorovna, meanwhile remained in Pokrovskoye almost alone, forced to endure constant gossip. Villagers often saw her in tears, believing that I had abandoned my family for my strange religious exploits. However, she continued to steadfastly defend my reputation, asserting that I was chosen by God and merely fulfilling my destiny. These spiritual wanderings profoundly changed me. From a simple peasant, I gradually transformed into a person around whom an ever-growing group of followers gathered. People began to believe in my special power, asking for my prayers and advice. Soon, pilgrims and simple peasants flocked to Pokrovskoye to me, hoping for healing and blessings. Already during my first wanderings I began to demonstrate what would later become the foundation of my fame, and, simultaneously, the source of countless disputes. I am referring to the ability to heal the suffering, and although rumors of my miraculous healings eventually became embellished with incredible, almost fantastical legends, historical sources still preserved concrete eyewitness testimonies, describing the first manifestations of my unusual abilities. One of the most well-known early episodes occurred in my native village of Pokrovskoye in 1901, long before my appearance in St. Petersburg. Local traditions meticulously record the account of peasant woman Anna Semyonovna Yurova, whose husband fell gravely ill and for a long time could not get out of bed. Doctors from Tobolsk proved powerless. They could neither make an accurate diagnosis nor help the patient. Then, in complete despair, Yurova decided to turn to me, Grigori Rasputin. According to her recollections, I entered the house, silently approached the patient's bedside, and then prayed long and intently, occasionally touching the sufferer's head. Witnesses claimed that the patient gradually calmed down, and the very next day he was able to get up on his own and even leave the house. This incident immediately spread throughout Pokrovskoye and the surrounding villages, bringing me my first recognition and fame. However, historians, particularly Sergei Fursov and Edvard Rudzinski, approached this event critically. The patient's improved condition could have been linked to ordinary psychological influence caused by the deep faith of the patient himself and his loved ones, or it could have been a simple coincidence, a result of autosuggestion, or even entirely a placebo effect. Another no less interesting point is described by historian Sergei Fursov, based on archival materials and recollections of Tobolsk residents. In 1902, while in Tobolsk, I was invited to the home of a local merchant whose son suffered from severe epileptic seizures. According to surviving testimonies, I performed a long prayer, after which I placed my hand on the boy's forehead and commanded him to sleep peacefully. Eyewitnesses claimed that the child immediately fell into a deep sleep, and in the following days the epileptic seizures significantly decreased. Modern historians, however, emphasize epilepsy, especially in those times, was poorly diagnosed, and the patient's condition could well have improved under the calming effect induced by the ritual itself, and the family's unwavering belief in my power. At the same time, alongside these cases, clearly exaggerated stories quickly spread. For instance, residents of neighboring villages spoke of allegedly complete healings from incurable diseases, such as blindness or paralysis. But no confirmation of these events has been preserved in official sources. Historian Rudzinski believes that such exaggerations were a natural result of popular imagination and the peasants' desire to see miracles where they most wished for them. Such legends significantly bolstered my reputation and made my figure even more controversial. It is important to note that I myself never openly claimed to possess supernatural abilities. In conversations with villagers and pilgrims, I always emphasized, healing occurs only through God, and my own role is merely sincere prayer and faith. Such behavior only reinforced the certainty of those around me in my genuine sanctity and sincere religiosity, although historians today believe that such statements were part of a deliberately crafted image. My unusual abilities also attracted the attention of the official church. Documents from the Tobolsk diocese contain information about inspections conducted by priests to ascertain the authenticity of my actions, and although there were no official confirmations of miracles, the inspections themselves clearly show, Local church authorities took my growing reputation seriously. They saw in me both a potential aid in strengthening faith and a possible rival who could undermine their own authority. Thus, historians agree that the initial manifestations of my healing abilities were largely a result of my personal charisma, deep religious feeling, and ability to instill calmness in those around me. When the fame of the unusual Siberian pilgrim, meaning myself, spread far beyond my native Pokrovskoy, I became known not only to common folk, but also to representatives of higher Russian society. In St. Petersburg at the beginning of the 20th century, many nobles and aristocrats were captivated by a fashion for mystical teachings, occultism, and popular religiosity. In such an atmosphere, my appearance, an unusual charismatic peasant from distant Siberia, was received with immense curiosity and even a certain enthusiasm. My first step towards rapprochement with the higher circles of society was my acquaintance with influential representatives of the capital's clergy. In 1903, I arrived in St. Petersburg and was introduced to Bishop Sergius, rector of the St. Petersburg Theological Academy. This meeting made a strong impression on him. Sergius saw in me a man of rare sincerity, unlike the spiritual figures customary in the capital. Soon, Sergius introduced me to his friend, Archimandrite Theophan, a renowned preacher who already had access to the Imperial Family and enjoyed their trust. The Archimandrite was also struck by my simplicity and frankness. Our conversations often touched upon questions of prayer, spiritual life, and the necessity of living faith instead of formal adherence to church rituals. In his memoirs, Theophan noted that I could speak for hours about true Christian humility and the necessity of cleansing the heart from pride and worldly vanity. These conversations led Theophan to see in me a person capable of revitalizing and renewing the church environment. Another important person from the spiritual milieu with whom I became acquainted was the young and ambitious hieromonk Iliador. Unlike Sergius and Theophan, my relationship with Iliador was complicated and highly ambiguous. Our first meeting also took place at the Archimandrite's house. However, Iliador initially reacted to me rather coolly, with undisguised suspicion. Being a bright, emotional, and uncompromising individual, Iliador critically perceived the influence of a simple peasant on such authoritative spiritual figures, and did not immediately see me as a kindred spirit. Nevertheless, over time, a gradual rapprochement began between us, based on shared views regarding the need for church reform. After several joint conversations and sermons, Iliador eventually appreciated my charisma and spontaneity, gradually beginning to publicly support my ideas. The hieromonk saw in me the embodiment of popular faith, sincere and free from church bureaucracy and formalism. However, our relationship was never simple or unambiguous. Iliador at times criticized the excessive freedom with which I interpreted religious truths, and our alliance was more a temporary collaboration than a firm friendship. A key moment on the path to the imperial court was my acquaintance with the influential Montenegrin princesses Malika and Anastasia, who had direct access to the imperial family. It was Archimandrite Theophan who insisted on my personal meeting with the Montenegrin sisters, believing that I could assist them in their religious quests. Thanks to these connections, my name rapidly spread among the capital's aristocracy. Many began to invite me for private conversations and spiritual consultations, seeking to touch my mysterious power. It was through the Montenegrin princesses that I entered the inner circle of the imperial family. The princesses were keen on mysticism and spiritual quests, and I became a frequent guest at their salon, where all of St. Petersburg aristocracy gathered. At these gatherings, I spoke about the spiritual renewal of society, personal salvation, and the need to return to simple but sincere Christian values. According to contemporaries' recollections, my speech was always calm and confident. I did not use complex expressions, but I knew how to touch the hearts of even the most skeptical listeners, as if I saw their innermost aspirations. Impressed by their interactions with me, the Montenegrin princesses decided to introduce me to Emperor Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna. The first meeting took place on November 1, 1905, at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo. Despite the initial wariness of the emperor and empress, I quickly gained their trust. Nicholas II later recorded in his diary that I made an impression on him as a man of rare simplicity and sincerity, and Empress Alexandra felt a special spiritual kinship with the Siberian pilgrim, and accepted me as someone who could provide the family with invaluable spiritual support. After our first meeting with the imperial couple, I managed to establish truly trusting and close relations with the imperial family in a short time. The main factor contributing to such rapid rapprochement was the severe, debilitating illness of the heir to the throne, Tsarevich Alexei. Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a terrible hereditary disease in which any even minor injury could lead to prolonged, life-threatening bleeding. The imperial family lived in constant tension and terror for the heir's life, and medicine of those years was completely powerless against this affliction. It was in this critical, almost hopeless situation that I appeared, managing to instill in the imperial family faith in my ability to alleviate the Tsarevich's suffering through prayer and spiritual support. A particularly important and meticulously documented episode occurred in the autumn of 1912, confirmed by numerous sources, the imperial family's diaries and correspondence. At that time, the imperial family was vacationing in the Polish town of Spala. During a boat ride, Alexei slipped and sustained a severe hip injury. The result was a very severe internal hemorrhage and a massive life-threatening hematoma. The heir's condition worsened by the day. The boy suffered from terrible pain, almost lost the ability to move, and his small body was wasting away before their eyes. The doctors observing him declared the situation critical, openly warning the parents of a possible tragic outcome. The atmosphere within the imperial family was strained to the limit, almost suffocating, and Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna was on the verge of complete despair. At this critical moment, when hope seemed to have faded, the Empress sent me an urgent telegram. I was then far away in Siberia, in my native village of Pokrovskoye. In the telegram, she implored me to pray for her son's health, and express the deepest hope for my spiritual assistance. My reply was brief and simple, but it had an enormous psychological impact on the Empress and all members of the imperial family. My words in the telegram read, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not let the doctors bother him too much." This short but powerful phrase made the strongest impression on Alexandra Fyodorovna. The Empress took my words literally as a voice from above and immediately followed my advice. She restricted the doctor's intervention in Alexei's treatment, canceled painful procedures such as massages and constant medical examinations, ensuring the heir complete rest and a comfortable atmosphere, far removed from the hustle and tension of medical consultations. As a result of this decision, the atmosphere within the imperial family became significantly calmer. The anxiety and nervousness that had previously been transmitted to the heir decreased. A short time later, Alexei's condition began to improve in a completely unexpected way. The internal bleeding gradually ceased, the pain diminished, and the boy, contrary to the doctor's gloomiest predictions, began to recover. This event was meticulously described in the diaries and correspondence of Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, and in the memoirs of courtiers and doctors who observed the heir. From the perspective of the imperial family, what happened seemed an absolute miracle, and fully confirmed my extraordinary spiritual abilities in their eyes. However, modern historians and medical professionals view this episode differently. Researchers such as Alexander Bakanov and Sergei Fursov emphasize that the improvement in the heir's condition cannot be attributed to supernatural intervention. They lean towards the explanation that the improvement occurred due to a combination of factors. Firstly, the psychological effect played a crucial role. My telegram significantly reduced stress and emotional tension for both the Empress and the Tsarevich himself. Secondly, the abandonment of traumatic and painful medical procedures, for example, constant massages, which could actually worsen the child's condition, gave his body the necessary rest and the opportunity to recover on its own. Even the doctors who treated Alexei admitted that their active intervention might have inadvertently caused more harm than good. when the episodes with the heir's illness finally convinced Empress Alexandra and Emperor Nicholas II of my special abilities, my influence at court began to grow rapidly. However, the true limits of my power were far from the mythical proportions attributed to me by rumor. To understand my real impact on the politics of the Russian Empire, it is necessary to thoroughly examine the characters of Nicholas and Alexandra, as well as the extremely complex situation prevailing in the country at that time. The Russian Empire at the beginning of the 20th century found itself in the deepest crisis. The recent Russo-Japanese War had ended in a heavy defeat, and the revolutionary events of 1905 had severely shaken the monarchy's authority. The country constantly lived in a state of social and economic tension, sensing impending upheavals. Under these circumstances, Nicholas II proved to be an indecisive ruler, prone to hesitation, and highly dependent on the opinions of those close to him. His wife, Alexandra Fyodorovna, on the other hand, possessed a strong-willed character, but at the same time was prone to severe emotional instability, and often sought support from those she trusted spiritually and emotionally. I became precisely such a person for her. Initially, my influence extended primarily to the personal matters of the imperial family, and naturally to the heir's health, but gradually I began to actively offer advice on political matters as well, though often without much depth. The Empress often took my words literally, and with complete, almost childlike faith, relayed them to her husband, thereby exerting noticeable pressure on him. Nevertheless, Nicholas II did not always follow my recommendations, especially if they concerned truly important state decisions. My influence became particularly noticeable after Nicholas II went to the front of the First World War in September 1915, assuming the duties of Supreme Commander-in-Chief. His prolonged absence from the capital meant that Alexandra Fyodorovna effectively became the primary person responsible for the country's internal affairs. Being in constant anxiety for the fate of her husband, the country, and her ailing son, the Empress drew me even closer to herself, and began to regularly seek my advice and recommendations on a wide variety of issues, including the internal situation in the state. However, there are virtually no real documented cases where I personally secured the appointment or dismissal of ministers, although rumors of my all-powerful interference in politics constantly circulated in society and the press. There is no concrete evidence that the emperor appointed or dismissed ministers solely on my recommendation. It is only known that many officials, including ministers and diplomats, felt strong irritation and outright dissatisfaction with my constant presence at court and my attempts to offer my recommendations. Nevertheless, there are known episodes when my opinion became one of the factors influencing the emperor's decision. For example, in 1915, Minister of Internal Affairs Nikolai Maklakov was dismissed after I publicly expressed my negative attitude towards him. Maklakov openly criticized my presence at court, believing that it discredited the imperial family and inflicted irreparable harm on the monarchy's authority. This caused displeasure for both myself and Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, who always heeded the advice of her spiritual counselor. And although Nicholas II's decision to dismiss him was not solely caused by my opinion, the elder's negative assessment of the minister undoubtedly played a role in intensifying pressure on the emperor, accelerating the decision-making process. Despite my real power at court being limited, the mere fact of my constant presence near the imperial family caused increasing irritation in Russian society. Rumors of my supposedly immoral behavior, of scandals and abuses associated with me, were actively spread by opposition forces and the press, greatly exaggerating my actual role. As a result, a myth was created about some dark, almost diabolical power of the elder, allegedly holding the Tsar and Tsarina under my complete, hypnotic control. For the opposition, this myth became a convenient and powerful tool for discrediting the monarchy. Within Russian society, particularly among the nobility, officers, and clergy, discontent rapidly grew concerning the presence of a person with such an ambiguous reputation at the imperial court. I became a symbol of the monarchy's crisis, and the embodiment of the weakness and indecisiveness of Tsarist power. My very presence and the rumors surrounding me inflicted immense, irreparable damage on the reputation of the emperor and empress, increasing division in society and intensifying revolutionary sentiments. The discontent of the Russian aristocracy and elite towards me was expressed not only in private conversations and backroom intrigues, but also in the active dissemination of the most damaging rumors. The most well-known and persistent of these was the accusation of my affiliation with a religious sect forbidden by the Church, Khlysty. Khlysty emerged in Russia in the mid-15th century as a sect whose followers rejected official church dogmas and rites. The sect preached the possibility of direct communion with God through collective rituals called radhanaya, ecstatic gatherings. During such gatherings, Khlysty would fall into a state of religious ecstasy. They sang, danced, spun until exhaustion, sometimes reaching a complete trance. A central element of these gatherings was self-flagellation and self-chastisement, symbolizing repentance for sins and the desire for spiritual purification. Furthermore, persistent rumors circulated, though not officially confirmed, that ritual orgies were also practiced at such radhanaya, purportedly to achieve even greater ecstasy and unity with God. Such rites were sharply condemned by the Church and authorities as immoral and heretical, and the sect itself was subjected to constant persecution. Accusations of my affiliation with Khlysty came, among others, from my former acquaintance, Hieromonk Iliador, who became one of my most vehement opponents. My relationship with Iliador deteriorated for several reasons. Iliador was an extremely ambitious man, intolerant of rivalry, and dreamed of seeing himself as the chief spiritual mentor and reformer trusted by the Imperial Family. However, I gradually pushed him into the background, gaining far greater trust. This deeply wounded Iliador's ego, and he began to see me as his chief rival and enemy. Furthermore, Iliador openly accused me of immorality, claiming that I allegedly corrupted my female followers and conducted ecstatic rituals. He made these accusations public, issuing loud, incriminating statements. But Iliador was far from the first to link me with the Khlysty. Similar accusations had been made earlier, and at a very high state level. Thus, as early as 1909, Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin received a series of reports and dossiers from the police and spiritual authorities which directly or indirectly claimed that I had ties with the Khlysty and preached ideas similar to theirs. Stolypin personally held a conversation with me, where he directly demanded that I cease interfering in state affairs and trying to influence politics, and also persistently recommended that I leave St. Petersburg and no longer appear at court. One of the reasons for Stolypin's abruptness was precisely the suspicion that I belonged to a dangerous and forbidden religious sect. However, no direct evidence could be presented. Nevertheless, the accusations were actively seized upon and widely publicized by the press, especially the opposition media. Newspapers published articles which, citing anonymous witnesses, claimed that I held secret gatherings at which indecent acts, dances, and even sexual orgies in the spirit of Khlysty rituals allegedly took place. These publications rapidly spread, forming an extremely negative image of me in the public consciousness. In 1912, the situation reached a critical point, and Emperor Nicholas II ordered an official investigation into these accusations. Minister of Internal Affairs Alexander Makarov organized a secret inquiry, which meticulously examined witness testimonies, denunciations, and statements, including the accusations of Iliador and other spiritual figures. Investigators delved deeply into my life, verified all facts of my biography, and interviewed people who knew me personally. However, they found no confirmation of the accusations. The official report presented to Nicholas II explicitly stated that there were no grounds to consider me a member of the Khlysty sect or any other forbidden organization. I myself, during numerous conversations with investigators, consistently denied the accusations, stating that I had always been faithful to the Orthodox faith and had nothing in common with sects. The Holy Synod also initiated its own investigation into these accusations, but came to a similar conclusion. The accusations were groundless and merely a manifestation of hostility and intrigues by the elder's opponents. Nevertheless, despite the official findings of the investigation, the myth of my affiliation with Khlysty proved exceptionally tenacious. It perfectly suited the atmosphere of political and social intrigues of that time. The Russian aristocracy and opposition actively supported this myth, using it to convince society and the Imperial Family of the danger emanating from me. In addition to this, there were numerous accusations concerning far more scandalous situations. One of the most famous was the story that occurred in March 1915 at the renowned Sandunovsky Baths in Moscow. According to preserved police reports and eyewitness testimonies, I was spotted in the women's section of the bathhouse, where men were strictly forbidden. Moreover, I was there without appropriate clothing, which caused public outrage and a loud scandal, immediately becoming fodder for newspapers and metropolitan gossip. And although the police only confirmed my presence in a forbidden area without evidence of direct immoral behavior, the reputational damage was significant and irreparable. No less debated was the story spread by my opponents that I once allegedly abused the hospitality of a family who sheltered me during one of my wanderings. In public opinion, the version took root that I had seduced the daughter of my trusting hosts. This rumor was actively circulated by the press like hotcakes. However, no official investigation could find confirmation for such accusations. Overall, accusations of immorality and numerous immoral acts became an integral part of my public image. The elder's opponents spread rumors that during closed prayer gatherings, I allegedly committed actions incompatible with moral norms, under the pretext of absolving sins and spiritual purification. Newspapers actively supported and amplified these accusations, often failing to verify sources and publishing the most fantastical tales, as long as they were sensational. The formation of my demonic image was largely made possible by the mass media of that time. At the beginning of the 20th century, Russian journalism experienced a real boom in sensational and exposé materials. My image as a Siberian elder was exceptionally convenient for newspapers, and my scandalous behavior quickly became a pretext for publishing caricatures, pamphlets, and entire series of articles with loud exposés. Political opponents, such as State Duma Deputy Vladimir Purishkovich, actively disseminated materials depicting me as a debaucher who had subjugated the Imperial Family and threatened state security. However, preserved historical documents and materials from official investigations show that the overwhelming majority of such accusations were either greatly exaggerated or entirely fabricated. In most cases, the authors of such materials relied on anonymous rumors and conjectures, pursuing the sole aim of discrediting me and thereby undermining the authority of the imperial court. Nevertheless, many historians agree that I did indeed maintain numerous free relationships with women, including my female followers, who voluntarily became objects of my attention. There is no confirmation that I ever used force or coercion, although such behavior in itself was unacceptable and shocking by the strict social norms of that time. Thus, the legends about my debauched life are a complex intertwining of my real, albeit provocative actions, and deliberately exaggerated and fabricated accusations, which became a vivid example of early smear campaigns created by the press and my opponents. My demonic image, despite its obvious exaggeration, had an enormous impact on public opinion. But the numerous accusations and scandals that accompanied me were not limited merely to rumors and newspaper articles. My reputation made me a real target for assassination, long before my death. Already from 1912, when public animosity towards me reached a critical point, open calls and conspiracies aimed at the physical elimination of the dangerous favorite of the Imperial Family began. The first documented and most famous assassination attempt occurred on June 29, 1914 in my native village of Pokrovskoy. The assailant was Kionia Guseva, a simple peasant woman, a former follower of Hieromonk Iliador. My active and ardent opponent, Guseva, inflicted a deep knife wound to my abdomen right near my house. The attempt was almost fatal. I lost a lot of blood and was in critical condition, but thanks to timely medical assistance, I still survived. During interrogations, Giseva stated that she acted on religious motives, considering me an antichrist and a seducer of souls, corrupting people and leading Russia to ruin. The investigation revealed that the spiritual instigator and ideologue of the assassination attempt was indeed Ilyador. Although his direct involvement was not legally proven, and he avoided responsibility, this event was extremely telling. My image had become so demonized in public consciousness that people could perceive my elimination as a sacred duty and the only possible way to save the country. However, the attacks did not stop there. Over the following years, the Okhrana, secret police, and I personally regularly received numerous letters and anonymous notes containing direct death threats. Archival evidence of such communications has been preserved. One of the letters addressed to me contained the following: Siberian sorcerer, you have ruined Russia, but you will soon receive your just deserts. Such threats were received regularly, which forced the authorities to significantly strengthen measures to ensure my safety. It was decided to assign me constant protection, which monitored my movements and controlled my personal contacts. This was confirmed by police reports and diary entries from my circle, testifying to constant anxiety for my life. Behind these threats and assassination attempts were not only religious fanatics, but also powerful political groups, for whom I was a convenient symbol of the crisis and failures of the Russian Empire during the First World War. An important fact, testifying to the elite's real attitude towards me, was that even among the highest nobility and those close to the Imperial Family, the idea of my physical elimination was widespread. The State Duma deputy Vladimir Purishkovich publicly expressed extreme hostility towards me, openly calling me a malignant tumor on the body of Russia that needed to be excised. Such statements were heard not only behind closed doors, but also publicly, reflecting broad public support for the idea of the need to get rid of the elder. And so, the tension surrounding my figure, as well as the numerous threats I have already mentioned, logically led to the execution of the most famous conspiracy in December 1916. The central figures of this sinister plot were individuals belonging to the highest echelons of Russian society, who had direct access to the imperial court and enjoyed immense respect within their circles. The first and most well-known participant in the conspiracy was Prince Felix Yusupov, a representative of one of the wealthiest and most noble families of the Russian Empire. Yusupov was known for his extravagant lifestyle, being a charismatic and adventurous man. His animosity towards me was deeply personal, almost fanatical, emotional, and unwavering. He believed that I was the main culprit of the crisis into which the country had plunged, and was convinced that my influence precisely led to the catastrophic decline in the imperial family's prestige. Yusupov repeatedly stated that he saw my assassination as a personal mission, necessary for the salvation of Russia. The second significant participant was Vladimir Purishkovich, a State Duma deputy known for his ultra-conservative views and monarchist convictions. Purishkovich was a passionate and radical man in his political convictions, genuinely convinced that my elimination would help strengthen the Tsarist regime and restore its former lost authority. The third particularly important participant in the conspiracy was Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich Romanov, a first cousin of Emperor Nicholas II himself. Young, ambitious, and popular in high society circles, Dmitry Pavlovich was one of those who genuinely believed that my influence was ruinous for both his own family and the entire country. His participation in the conspiracy was extremely significant, as the presence of a member of the Imperial Family lent legitimacy and a special, almost sinister seriousness to the entire operation. Besides these three main protagonists, the conspiracy also involved less-known but equally important figures. Specifically, Dr. Stanislav Lazavert, a young military doctor responsible for the medical aspects of the murder's preparation, and Lieutenant Sergei Suhotin, an officer of the Preobrazhensky Regiment, my trusted associate and close friend of Prince Yusupov. Their involvement only underscored the seriousness and meticulously planned nature of the conspiracy, as Lazavert was responsible for selecting and preparing the poison, and Suhotin assisted in the organization and directly participated in the events of that fateful night. Late in the evening on December 16, 1916, I arrived at the Yusupov Palace on the Moika River embankment in St. Petersburg. Prince Yusupov had invited me there under the pretext of introducing me to his wife, Grand Duchess Irina Alexandrovna, who, however, was actually far away in Crimea and completely unaware of the impending murder. Around midnight, Yusupov met me and led me to a specially prepared small room located in the basement of the palace. The room had been furnished beforehand as a setting for a cozy and confidential conversation. There were a table and chairs. Snacks, wine, and sweets, including pastries, were served. According to the conspirators' initial plan, I was to eat the poisoned pastry prepared by Dr. Lazavert and drink the poisoned wine, then quickly die without a fuss. However, contrary to the conspirators' expectations, I showed no signs of feeling unwell for quite some time, continuing to converse calmly with Yusupov. Agitated and concerned by this turn of events, Yusupov left the room under the pretext of checking if everything was all right upstairs, and went to his accomplices, Purishkovich and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, who were on the upper floors of the palace, awaiting the completion of the operation. After conferring and deciding that the initial plan had failed, the conspirators made a terrible decision: to use a weapon. Yusupov returned to the basement, took a pre-arranged revolver, and, approaching me, unexpectedly fired a shot. I fell to the floor, and, believing me dead, Yusupov went upstairs again to inform the others that the deed was done. However, after some time, upon returning downstairs, the conspirators were horrified to discover I, severely wounded but alive, had managed to escape the basement and was attempting to flee across the courtyard like a wounded animal. This caused panic and confusion among the conspirators. Purishkovich immediately intervened in the situation. Grabbing his revolver, he ran out into the street after me and fired several additional shots, by which he killed me. After this, the conspirators wrapped my body in fabric, loaded it into a car, and drove to the outskirts of the city, to the Malaya Nevka, where they threw me into a hole in the ice, hoping to conceal the traces of the crime and avoid rapid discovery of the body. My body was discovered 2 days after the murder on December 19, 1916. It was found in a hole in the ice on the Malaya Nevka, near Petrovsky Bridge. The location was found relatively quickly thanks to police searches and testimonies from witnesses who reported strange activity and a car on the night of my murder. Police and divers retrieved the body from the icy water, after which it was sent for an official forensic medical examination. From the very beginning, my murder gave rise to numerous sensational legends and rumors. One of the most famous and persistent is the story of my allegedly incredible invincibility. According to it, I survived poison, withstood several gunshot wounds, and, still alive, was thrown into the icy water where I finally perished by drowning. However, detailed documentary materials from the forensic medical examination of that time shed light on the real circumstances of my death and largely refute these sensational versions. According to the official autopsy report, conducted by the senior physician of the forensic medical department, Professor Dmitry Kosarotov, my death resulted from several severe gunshot wounds. 3 bullet wounds were found in my body, one in the chest which pierced a lung and grazed the liver, one in the back which hit the spine, and one in the forehead, which was fatal and inflicted at close range. The examination also recorded numerous bruises and soft tissue damage, indicative of a brutal beating before my death. At the same time, the autopsy report noted that there was no water in my lungs. This means I did not drown, and by the time I was submerged in the ice hole, I was already dead. As for the widespread legend of poisoning, no traces of poison, specifically potassium cyanide, were found during the autopsy and subsequent examinations of my body. This fact officially confirms that the poison version, which Yusupov later actively disseminated in his memoirs, was a fictional embellishment, intended to emphasize the drama and mysticism of the murder. Modern historians agree that Yusupov might have deliberately invented or greatly exaggerated this detail to justify the need for a brutal killing, and to present me as some supernatural figure who could not be dealt with by ordinary means. After the fact of my murder became known, the Imperial Family and Emperor Nicholas II personally experienced the strongest shock. Initially, an investigation was launched, which quickly identified the main participants in the conspiracy. Despite the obviousness of their guilt, the investigation proved complex and painful for the monarchy. After all, the conspirators belonged to the highest strata of society, and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich was a member of the imperial family. Ultimately, Nicholas II confined himself to relatively lenient punishments. Prince Yusupov was exiled to his estate near Kursk. Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich was sent to serve in Persia, and Purishkovich was dispatched to the front. Despite the obvious gravity of the crime, none of the conspirators received a stricter punishment. The consequences of my murder turned out to be entirely different from what the conspirators had planned. Instead of the expected pacification of society and strengthening of Tsarist authority, the exact opposite occurred. My murder, committed by high-ranking nobles close to the imperial family, further undermined the monarchy's authority, exposed the emperor's weakness, and revealed a catastrophic rift among the elites. This became one of the factors that accelerated the revolutionary events that led to the February Revolution of 1917, just 2 months later. The conspirators themselves were forced to emigrate after the revolution, and their subsequent fates unfolded differently. Prince Felix Yusupov spent the remainder of his life in exile in France, actively writing memoirs and recollections in which he continued to uphold the myth of the mystical nature of my death. Grand Duke Dmitry Romanov also lived his life in exile, dying in 1942 in Switzerland. Vladimir Purishkovich died of typhus as early as 1919 in Novorossiysk, without having managed to leave Russia. Thus, documented evidence from the forensic medical examination and archival materials of that period clearly indicate that the real circumstances of my death were far less mystical and dramatic than the legends that formed around this murder. Nevertheless, these myths, actively propagated in subsequent years, deeply entrenched themselves in public consciousness and formed a stable image of the unkillable and mystical Grigori Rasputin. After my demise, a heavy fate also befell my family, which immediately found itself in an extremely difficult situation. My wife, Praskovia Fyodorovna Rasputina, upon news of my death, faced constant pressure and hostility from the local population and the new authorities. Forced to leave her native village of Pokrovskoye, she traveled with her children to Tyumen, where she lived in poverty, deprived of any support or means of subsistence. She repeatedly tried to appeal to the new authorities for protection and assistance, but these attempts remained fruitless. Ultimately, she died in harsh conditions in Siberia in 1936, never receiving recognition and unable to escape the shadow of my fame. The fates of my children unfolded no less dramatically. My eldest daughter, Maria Grigorievna, was forced to leave Russia shortly after the revolutionary events, fleeing persecution and threats. Maria first emigrated to Europe, where she spent several years wandering and attempting to establish her life. Later, she moved to America, where she actively engaged in literary work and gave lectures, trying to restore my father's good name and combat the numerous myths and accusations surrounding my figure. Maria tried until the end of her days to convince the public that her father had been unfairly slandered, becoming a victim of political intrigues. Maria Rasputina died in 1977 in California. My second daughter, Varvara Grigorievna, had an even shorter and more tragic fate. She remained in Soviet Russia and, amidst drastic changes and constant privations, succumbed to a severe illness, never living to see improved living conditions or escaping persecution due to her father's notorious surname. As for the contemporary view of me, historians today regard my figure much more calmly and objectively than in the past century. Researchers emphasize that the true extent of my influence was much smaller than previously imagined. Despite becoming a potent symbol of the Russian Empire's crisis and the decline of Tsarist power, my personal actions and decisions could not significantly alter the political situation in the country. In fact, I was a person used by various forces, both the opposition and those close to the court, for their own interests. Over time, historical research and archival materials have provided an opportunity to view my personality more soberly, freeing it from years of exaggerations and mystifications. Concluding this account, I wish to emphasize why it is so crucial to separate historical reality from myths and legends. The point is that myths, despite all their allure, often distort and simplify the picture of real events, hindering us from objectively understanding and grasping the lessons of history. My figure, surrounded by myths, sensations, and political intrigues, is a vivid example of how easily public opinion succumbs to the influence of rumors and speculation. By understanding the genuine events of the past, studying them without bias, we gain the opportunity to see beyond historical figures to living people with all their strengths and shortcomings, merits and weaknesses. This approach helps us to understand not only the past but also the present more deeply, to see the causes of certain events and to recognize their consequences. Today, I have tried to tell you the real story of my life and death as thoroughly and objectively as possible, separating fact from legend, truth from fiction. But each of you, the viewers, undoubtedly has your own opinion and perception of this unusual historical figure. Write in the comments whom you consider me to be. A mystic and prophet, a victim of circumstances, a cunning manipulator, or a person unfairly slandered by history. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you don't miss new lectures. And be sure to share your opinion in the comments. See you next time on my channel.